Welcome to the final panel, the final conversation on the Off the Record stage. My name is Josh Rivers. I'm the creator and host of the award-winning podcast, Busy Being Black. You're supposed to go, ooh. I can't actually hear you. But thank you for playing along. It's been an amazing day here on the Off the Record stage. We've had some incredible conversations about black entrepreneurship, about funding, about social justice. And it's an amazing opportunity to close this wonderful day on the stage with a conversation about investments in and investing for Africa. To help us have this conversation about the potential and how we might do it properly are an esteemed panel of people. I'm going to read from my phone. I hope that's okay. Hashtag tech. Moderating the conversation is Seven Jacobs. We've got Uka Eje, Rich Serenjogi, Yewande Amondu, and Amber Clifford. Please put your hands together for Investing in Africa. I'm so sorry. I'm also supposed to say thank you to our sponsors on this stage for the duration of the day. It's been a great help. Thank you so much for your support. They're various. Look them up. And Microsoft AI has sponsored our after party, which starts downstairs at 5 p.m. And don't forget that on the main stage, we still have a keynote conversation with Kelechi Okafor after this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hey, everyone. Apparently, this is a really in-demand panel, as it should be, because as you'll hear from all the introductions, this panel has so much experience, so much insight, so much wisdom to share. So really quickly, if everyone could get started, because we don't have loads of time up here, quick introduction to yourselves, who you are, what you do, your experience. Rich.
Sure, thank you. My name is Rich Serenjogi. Started off life at McKinsey here in London. I sold my first company, which was YC back last summer. And now I actually invest into companies out of the Pioneer Fund, which is the YC alumni fund. So all of us put some of our money into it. We invest into companies across the world, including quite a few African ones as well.
Hi, my name is Yewande Odmosu. I started my career as a corporate person in Africa. I was born, used to live in Lagos, Nigeria, and then moved into startups, sold the startup as well, did a couple of engineering technology businesses, and now moved fully into investing. I'm the managing partner of Hope Ventures Fund. Hope started as a community club. We've deployed $3 million into 90 startups, and now we're raising a $5 million fund. We invest in startups that are focused in Africa or in the diaspora, like in the UK, US, around Europe, and yeah, that's a short intro.
Hi everyone, my name is Amber Clifford, and I started my journey in tech in 2014, back in the day at Uber in the US, I'm American if you can tell by the accent, in Atlanta, Georgia. And I came over to the EMEA region, Europe, Middle East, Africa, in 2016 to help Uber Eats spread to and launch across the globe. I then switched to Disney Plus to do the same thing. So everywhere outside of the US, helping think through the strategy from product, marketing, operations, and just where to go and more. So now I'm the founder of Murray Consulting, my own consulting firm that I lead with the team to help businesses do the same thing. Kind of think where should they go, why, how, and do it appropriately. Sorry. Thank you. Don't have your phone on the stage, but thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Uka Eje and I'm the CEO of Triva Group. So at Triva Group we work with rural smallholder farmers in Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya and Zambia to give them access to finance, to technology-based advisory and access to export market. And we've been able to help these rural communities and farmers to access over $70 million in financing over the period that we've been working. So that's it.
Cool. Thank you so much. And I realized I didn't give a quick intro to myself. For those that weren't up here earlier, I'm the startup lead at Color and Tech, the nonprofit that runs BTF and lots of other things for founders and investors. So get to work with incredible entrepreneurs and people that support them, like yourselves. And let's start with that perspective. If you are an entrepreneur, if you're a founder with a business, growing a business, how do you know if Africa is a market that you should get into? And we had this whole conversation offline of actually Africa is gets lumped in as this big group, but actually it's lots of different smaller markets. So I think, Amber, we'll go to you first because you look at different markets and how to analyze them, and then we'll get everyone else's thoughts as well.
I think it's a great question. I think we talked about this, but it's super important you hear people talk about an African strategy, which is fine to use that phrase, but recognizing that the continent is 54 different countries, and while there are similarities amongst some of them, and you can make kind of clusters of subregions that might make sense to consider as a whole, there are different regulations, different cultures, different nuances that do determine if a place is a good market for you. So I think the first thing is your product valuable? It's not the case in that market. And you need to really look at what are the dynamics, what are the numbers, all of that, and then also what are the cultural nuances and legal that play into how you can fit in. And you build the business on numbers, but nothing's more important, and I'm sure you guys have a lot to add here, about being on the ground and understanding the rhythm of the place you're in, what the people are looking for, and kind of assessing your business from not only the numbers, but also from the cultural relevance and the actual how.
Rich, I want to get your perspective here on yourself as a founder, almost the founder profile. How do you look at yourself as a founder and go, should this be something I should do? How do you know what, if any of the markets within Africa are a good option for you or not?
Very loud, I feel like a DJ here.
Yeah, I know, I was sorry about that.
And just to clarify, you're saying a founder who's thinking about launching a new thing?
Exactly.
Okay, absolutely.
Or expanding if that's relevant.
Yeah, I mean, can we just really ask, is there anyone in the audience who is a founder?
We've got
a couple.
Right.
How about, is there anybody who works at a large company, maybe the Ubers, the Googles of the world, who are thinking about expanding into Africa?
a few again.
Okay, and I guess everyone else is somewhere in the middle. I guess for anyone who's like an operator and you're thinking about potentially launching a company in Africa, the first question is how much time have you spent there? And to the point around being on the ground, I think it's very, different, of having African heritage, like many of us in the room do. Yeah, it's really, being able to get down with, with our cousins or extended family that live out there. And so my take is, if you haven't spent, at least some time out there, or you're not necessarily willing to live there, then it might be something that you want to either reconsider or B, test your conviction by going and working for a startup that's already in the region doing something in the field that you want to go into.
And now, from the investor perspective, right, why is it such an interesting place for investors to be playing in, right? Why should investors be looking at Africa or specific sub-regions, specific countries as markets to go into for similar reasons to what Rich was just describing?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really great question. I think, like Amber said, there's a lot of fragmentation in Africa, and that also presents opportunities because there's a young population. Africa has one of the youngest populations. Most of the people in Africa are under 25. They are now getting exposed to digital. There's a young workforce there. They are Africa is leapfrogging a lot of things, even though there are challenges. So, for example, you'd see people go straight into mobile phones, and you'll be surprised that where there's electricity penetration very low, there's also still mobile phones. So there are opportunities to now tap into that. And because of that, while Rich is right saying that, is either you're going to spend more time there, you can actually start by partnering people on ground, learning, their local partners. I'm sure Uka can talk more about it. And then if the next frontier is Africa, the earlier you go there, or the earlier you partner, or the earlier you actually have visibility into that, the better. Because obviously, just like India, we all see what's happening in India. Those opportunities were seen 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 10 years ago, and that's what's also happening in Africa. The only difference is, Africa is quite big. These countries are different, so it would take a lot of time, it would take a lot of support. But then, for example, there are Francophone countries where there are some similarities. They're French-speaking, and even though their regulation is different, if you can hack one market in the Francophone countries, so countries like Senegal, French like Cameroon, you can actually now accelerate and leapfrog along with them. And finally, over the last 2 to 5 years, a lot of companies have started. I don't think there's been a time when the amount of companies that are started on the continent has accelerated like the last 2 to 5 years. In the last 2 years, we've had over 100 M&As, exits. We have acquisitions now. So you see international companies coming to buy companies. So you have Stripe buying Paystack, you have InstaDip, you have, the different plays now happening. And I think this is the best time to be able to look into that.
I'm going to ask you a question in just a second, but I don't want to leave that point behind, because despite everything you've just said, despite the unicorns, despite the exits, despite the mounting evidence, a very, very tiny proportion of venture capital money goes into the continent. Talk to us a little bit about that, about how much does go in, how much doesn't, why more should go in, and how we start to bridge that gap. I know that's a lot I just threw at you, but get us started, and then I'm going to go to...
Yeah. I think... apart from this year where a lot of things have, there's the downturn, I think over the last 2 to 5 years, we've had billions of dollars going to Africa. But what we've seen is and I think when we earlier discussed, they have been going to what we call the big four, like, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, and Egypt. And these countries are countries where there's some form of, high growth in different traditional and non-traditional areas. There's regulatory support. There's younger population there, and there's just a couple of factors that have acted as levers, and so the investors have rushed to those markets. However, it's still not enough, because the problems and the opportunities are still way larger than what people had envisaged. And even though I know you mentioned, sorry, there's a point you mentioned that I forgot. But anyway, so for me, should more capital go to other countries? Yes. Should more capital go to these big four countries? Yes. For example, if you go to like a country in I don't know, West Africa, the check sizes that the entrepreneurs are getting are not enough. I mean, a lot of black people are still underserved and not underfunded. But then there's much more capital that can go and do much more, and that's what that's why we also still invest in Africa.
In a second, I think we're going to come to how, right? How do we bridge that gap? But Uka, I want to come to yourself. As a founder who started your business in one country, you've expanded to a number of countries within Africa, and then now also international. Talk to us about that journey, what that was like, challenges you faced, and how you grew in those different markets and understanding the different markets.
All right, thank you for that question. As a founder, we had to make a decision that we were not going to have assumptions about every of the African markets in terms of similarities. We made up our mind that all the 54 countries in Africa were different cultures, just as has been said, different cultures, different regulatory environment, different maturity levels in terms of financial literacy. So, that was important for us. We spent time to take deep-rooted, study of all of the players. And then for us, especially in our space, we had to know some of the partners that we were going to work with. And then it was pretty much a partner-led approach to expansion. So some of the people that we're working with, we started off in Nigeria. So some of the people we were working with in Nigeria had expressions in other of the countries, in the 3 other countries that we are present in. So what we did was to take that leap, and then while studying all of these countries, and then it was pretty easy.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you for that. Look, there's a lot to unpack. It's a really shame we don't have as much time as we need to go through everything we could learn from you all today. First thing I want to do is expand a bit more on what you just said around how to evaluate those different markets in more depth, right? How did you go about, tell us the story in a bit more detail, how did you go about finding what was right for you, which places, which countries, which regions were right for you to expand into? How did you build that strategy? Get really practical about it. And then Amber, I think we're going to have you follow up with your experience in that as well.
Okay, so as you move from Eastern African countries down to Western African countries, you notice that there are quite a number of differences, right? And for instance, for my space in agriculture, there are differences around climate, and it can pose as a problem and also as a lot of advantages. And regulatory problems also, and at some point you need to be able to because at the stage that we as the start of my B, you need to, because at that early stage, you have the opportunity to formulate policies, and that's usually helpful at that time. And then being a part of deciding where these companies will go, I think that was helpful.
Okay, you had to find lots of local partners, essentially, really build a strategy around them. Amber, what worked for you in the things you've worked on?
You know, what I would say is really the first step is knowing your company and your company's goals, like convicted to you. And I think I like that you brought up that so much capital goes to the big four. I think if I think about like the how, maybe your company's goals aren't actually to play in a super competitive market. Maybe your company actually, you know, I think if you're a Francophone company or you're based in a Francophone country, you may want to just go around to the other ones, and therefore you don't have to pick up another language. And so I think it's really first starting with what is important to your company and what are your goals and what are you trying to achieve in terms of level or market penetration. And then I always call it building a business on paper. It's from afar. You get all the data and all the dynamics. You know, you talk the internet penetration, the research is out there, particularly for the big four, on your total addressable market and the desire or the need or the gaps for kind of the problem you're trying to solve. Dig down in that and really then, at least on paper, say, this kind of makes sense. And then when it aligns the paper and your goals align, get on the ground and start partnering with people who are in it already. Talk to everyone you can, literally the problems, the good, the bad, everything in between, and start to really get to know that market. And from there, you'll have a leading way, and then, you know, it's a whole different conversation about the actual
Sure. So
executional.
what I'm noticing here is we've got a lot of untapped opportunity, which has been talked about. We've got strategies and ways that businesses can do that and can and are tapping into that. Let's now talk about the investor side. Yuande, do you think investors understand all this opportunity we're talking about, right? If there's all this opportunity that founders know about, they're doing it well, there are people like Amber who are able to assess these markets, businesses that need to be expanding, but it's just not happening, not enough money is moving into the continent. Why? Do you think investors don't know enough? Do you think it's a data thing, like as Amber was just mentioning? What is it? And then we'll come to you as well.
I think it's a combination of everything you said. So foreign investors have, you know, started learning, and obviously, like with founders doing so well, like Uka, you know, they can see like a track record. They can start to understand. We have co-investors that are bigger and smaller, and they ask us questions. They also look to us as local partners to give them like insights. But it's still not enough. A lot of people are not trying to experiment and fun, and that's why we do all the work we do, to be able to like give that visibility. Will it change? I think so. It's just the rate at which it will change that we're looking at. We try to publish. I think most of us in Africa, we're aware. So, for example, there are little things, you know, in terms of product insights. So, for example, I'll give you an example. Young people have mobile phones, but even those mobile phones have different levels. So, a young person in Europe might have like a proper, you know, smartphone, while a young person in Africa might have a mobile phone, but it's called a feature phone. And the feature phone may have, you know, some capabilities or another capability that's, you know, so on. And so when you're building and designing, it's not that you cannot reach those people, just you have to understand the nuances. I think a lot of people have started to write and have started to share enough information. I think investors are looking, but it's still not enough. I know that, for example, there's Y Combinator, there's Techstars, even some African startups are now applying to Entrepreneur First, and they're looking to, you know, even the banks. So I know that, shout out to HSBC Innovation Bank, you know, they've been very, very supportive to African startups and even to us as a fund. So different players are really like trying to leverage, you know, local partners, local VCs, and I think that's one of the biggest things that, you know, people should take out. Like if you're trying to invest in Africa, partner with local VCs, partner with VCs on ground, listen to them, you know, watch them, support them, and, you know, you have more visibility to what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, on the investment side, I'm thinking more from like a US standpoint. But my take on this is it's quite a structural issue. I was chatting to some of the guys that run YC, and what it is in the biggest part is the reason or the way you would get an ecosystem where people writing checks is typically you've had founders who've exited their businesses and then they offer their angel checks. And so, for example, one of my friends, a guy called Ian, he you know, had two very big successful companies, one called Flutterwave, the other called Andela, and he started a fund called Future Africa, which invests into a lot of upcoming great founders. But the challenge is that for a lot of the larger funds, whether it's US or in Europe, the VC model requires them to get unicorn exits. But because they're only 20%, it means that if your company, for them to have $1 billion exit, your company needs to be worth $5 billion. But when you look at like the largest exit of a brilliant company, a guy called Scholler and Paystack, they exited for 200 million and got acquired by Stripe. And so typically the biggest opportunities and returns on the continent at the moment are fintech. And if that's like the largest one or one of the largest and it's 200 million, the reality is for venture, it's just not quite yet big enough just yet. And my take is the fact we've got, things such as demographic change and the markets are maturing. There's some really exciting infrastructure plays. And so I was actually entrepreneur in residence for an African fintech called Verto recently. And they're effectively building out like the cross-border infrastructure for Africa. And today it's not just quite there, but in the next 2 or 3 years, you're going to see a lot of larger players trying to enter the market. And that's where really we're going to see more investment.
Because long term, most of the world's population is declining. Whereas Africa is pretty much the only market, one of the only major market where there's a massive increase in population. With population as young people as well, as you mentioned, you get innovation, you get things being built, you get people wanting to create change. Long term might be 20, 30 years. Does that mean that the case is not compelling enough for enough investors, or is it, and it's just like a story narrative thing? In other words, what's the blocker that we can be educating, changing, bringing people together around to improve this and increase the amount of investment happening? Probably more than one.
That's an investor question.
The big companies, yeah. Who's you're with the Ubers. What makes them want to invest into the continent?
Yeah, I mean that's what I was going to say. I think that it's happening. I think a company like Uber or a Netflix or a Disney Plus being on the continent isn't recorded in VC funds. So those you're not seeing that in venture investments, but I think that what's happening here, what's happening at a global standpoint with African culture being championed and more knowledge being spread, and the diversity of Africa and the diversity of youth and from every facet of life, I think that elevates the ecosystem by landslides. When then companies, I'm in a big company, or when I was, then companies start talking about the continent and what we can do there and where it looks to go. And I think that, one thing that I hold super close when doing any type of expansion anywhere is it is always the people that are there, and I continue to harp on that because who know the pulse the best. And so I think the better we serve any place that we're bringing any product to, the only reason you bring it there is not just for funds, but it is to fix a challenge or to make the place more accessible or provide a service that is needed or wanted. Product market fit, we say, on our end. But I think that working with folks on the ground and really understanding what the desire and need is in the market, I think when we champion that louder, the business case, you can always make a business case.
Yeah, I guess to add to that, I guess from big companies, everything they do comes at opportunity cost. And one of my colleagues at Verto, he came from TransferWise, so now called Wise, and they wanted to expand into Africa, and he was actually the director responsible for that. And they pulled the plug after 2 years. And the reason why is that although they reckon Africa is going to be a massive market for them, say in 5 years' time, the reality is they can go to Sweden and basically get as much money, or they could go to, say, expand to America and get much more just by conquering, one state. And I think that is the thing is, for a lot of industries, there's still like a lot of opportunity in the West. And I think once that gets more saturated, you're going to see more organizations go into the continent. And that's where I think the opportunity cost makes more sense to go to Africa as an opportunity to expand as opposed to continuing in saturated markets.
It's a challenge, really quick one, which before you weigh in, we want to take questions. The challenge with this is like we're speaking from the founder perspective and the investor perspective, so there's so much that can come out. So in a second, we're going to take questions. Uka, I'll come to you for one more quick point before we do. There's a lot of people here, so please have your, oh, we've got 2 hands already, Christ. Right, someone's going to keep track of whose hands have gone up. I can't see well.
Yeah, I think just to latch in on what they have said is the more the education about Africa is going around, the more you see a lot of interest in Africa. Think about 10, 15 years ago, the maturity of fintech was not as it is today, and many other investments have not been seen in Africa as it is seen today. So the same thing can happen in multiple other sectors across Africa. And thank God for platforms like this to speak about the opportunities and the kind of things that can happen and to get people educated. And so that will be able to lessen the amount of time it will take to see exit happening and the kind of expansion for different sectors. So I believe that there's, beyond the fact that there's a story of a huge opportunity, there's also a story of a lot of money to be made as well in the short time.
Yeah, and I just wanted
really quickly,
I just wanted to add, and I mean he's touched on it. So we've all sat here and said, Africa is 54 countries, it's fragmented, it's this, but to some people they still don't understand. And I think now people are beginning to hold and understand and work with local partners, because you can say it a lot, but until you've experienced it or you've lived it, you really don't understand it. That's one. The second thing is, even as it can be challenging, if you look at the black unicorns, like the companies that are by black founders and are unicorns right now, the majority are African heritage or Africans. So if you count 10 black unicorns, 8 of them are from Africa. And so what that means is, if the future is this way, and if there's a young all the trends show you already that if you want to play and partake in the future, you actually have to do the work. But this time around, you have to listen, you have to work with local partners, you have to figure out the people that are doing the work, and then you have to put your money where that is, not just, you spray the money and you just expect you get. So for last example, I was traveling to Ghana, and someone in Europe was like, sorry, I had to change my SIM. And he was like, oh, but in Paris, in London, you just go to Paris and it's roaming. But you see, different nuances like that, people don't really get it. And that is why it's so important to support local VCs. It's so important to support local founders. It's so important to have opportunities like this to speak. And so that, they're not just listening, but they're understanding what we're saying.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much for that. We're going to take probably 3 questions. We're going to start in the front up here.
Cool. Thank you.
Just give a quick intro to yourself and then the question.
Okay, my name is Zachariah. So a lot of what I do is covering our hiring strategies and opportunities across Africa and Middle East. So I wrote this down because I'm kind of hear what you guys said. And I think one day in Amber it will be more relative to you guys. But you mentioned Africa is a high growth location for businesses, big tech, startups, and investment companies. But what we're noticing is businesses are relocating people to Africa as opposed to finding local talent and growing them. My question is, what are the tips that you have around that? Because investing in Africa is beyond the financial side, it's also the local talent, right? So I was just keen to hear thoughts on that.
Okay, so I can go first. From my perspective, so relocation is going both ways. Africa has a lot of talented tech people. Africa has a lot of talented entrepreneurs. I mean, it's almost like overflowing. And so while it looks like some few people are relocating there to support and run businesses, there's a lot of, in fact, the UK is also bringing in Africans to come teach them, to come help them with their ecosystem. And obviously this is on record. Germany is doing the same thing. Canada is doing the same thing, just because they've seen an abundance of talent. So I think if you're going to Africa, you're definitely going to find more robust set of skills with Africans. You're going to find smarter people that you expect. Not that they're smarter than anybody else in it, but better than you expect. So let me keep it short.
Cool. And then just quickly on that, I think that especially when building super operations-heavy businesses, on the ground, movement of things, etc., it is imperative to success to have a team that is majority from there. And I mean, if you have a couple people that come in and join from an HQ or something that, are starting, I would always, my role at big companies, I would help start. I would hire a local team. If not, what do I know? Like, I'm bringing in my knowledge of the company, my knowledge of the business, but I'm working with local folks to translate that. And then if there's some gaps because of I'm coming from the business and just the way the business does things, we fill those and then we pass off. And I think those businesses have run the best. There have been others where the model was not the same, and I watched a lot of them shut down.
I'm really glad you asked that question because we wanted to talk about it, didn't have time to, so thank you for that. Cool, and thank you. Time for maybe two more. It's just the mic is being passed up here.
Hello. Perfect. Hi, my name is Rumbi Mitsambiwa, and I am the head of implementation for East Africa for Viamo Inc. My question really is around, as someone that's had the opportunity and the privilege to work across East, West, and Southern Africa in technical roles and also hiring and building out teams. One of my biggest concerns, especially within the startups and the investment sphere, is that it comes across like for people, for companies to grow or to reach that level of investment, they have to register outside of Africa, whether it's doing registration in the UK or in America. And I'm always concerned that might have a detrimental long-term impact in terms of social development. What do you think stops people from feeling comfortable in registering or protecting their wealth within the continent, and what are the regulatory frameworks that might help or do things differently to support that ability to keep the wealth within the continent?
Okay, so I'll take that. So I think it's not that the companies don't register in the local countries. It's more like they also try to have a HQ play. And so most investors influence that, to be honest. And, majority of the investors would try to pick a region or a state that has friendly laws for investors and also friendly laws for startups. And so what is happening, although that is now changing a little bit, is a lot of the people would domicile their HQ where most of the investors feel the flow of money can be easy for them. They're able to be protected by the laws of the state or the laws of the country because they reside there. And then what we can do to change that is obviously like have more local VCs, have more, obviously most of us are working with policymakers to make it easier for investors to like have more visibility. And I think I'll just make it sure. I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything.
I mean, I'll just add a bit to that as a founder. When I started, I had to register. I mean, primarily, that's usually an investor-led conversation many times. And as you said, investors would want to secure the integrity of the funds that they're building, that they've invested in the business. So, and then at that point, I mean, as time goes on, and then as confidence of many investors begins to increase, then you notice that in different countries and locally, you'll be able to register the businesses.
Thank you for that. We're being told we're over time. However, I think our next thing's at 5, so they're going to hate me. We're going to take one more question, which I believe is back here.
Hi, good afternoon. Really fantastic panel, so insightful. My name is Lewis Good. I'm a strategy consultant at Accenture, focusing on how companies can activate their sustainability ambitions and still make money at the same time. You can both be sustainable and make money. My question is, I'll throw it to the panel and whoever wants to take it. I think all of you have sort of pointed to this idea, this notion that the continent is the place to be coming up in the next sort of 5, 10, 15 years, 5 of us being ambitious. I just wanted to understand, as somebody who is from the diaspora based here in London and does want to move there, what are the skills and experiences that will really activate this transition and really unlocking the potential that we all know that the continent beholds? So yeah, very vested question for me, wanting to go there.
Sorry, just to confirm, skills that you need?
Not skills that you need, but skills that will help the continent unlock and fulfill its potential. Like, what are the skills gaps that you guys are seeing, particularly in the innovation sector in the continent? Hey, everyone's thinking.
Clearly a great question.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the gap's probably the skills you have here, right? Probably working and living in London, getting context of what, folk out here want. And, as we know, unfortunately, today, it is definitely Western corporations that are setting the global agenda for innovation. So you've got relationships. You know, I'm sure you're an email away from probably the director of sustainability at Accenture. You've probably even met him or her or they. And so the fact you've got that and you can, you know, have a direct line, you can be someone to initiate and ask the question, are we doing anything on the continent? You know, could we maybe collaborate with some colleagues out there? Is an organization that you see, you know, maybe through the media is doing good work that you guys could reach out to, maybe support with, even some of the research you have. So I guess what I'll say is put it back to you and ask you, not what can they do, but what can you do for the continent? Because I'm sure you can do a lot.
Any other really quick thoughts on that?
So I was confused about the question, but I think the way that I thought about it was, you know, if we wanted more people to go back, or if you wanted to go back, I think first, obviously, you have to be courageous and spend more time. And the thing is, people in the diaspora have, you know, an advantage, meaning they've seen some things work at scale. And sometimes when you've seen some systems being built and you've seen some things work at scale, it's easier for you to vision it when you go back home. Now, the challenge is adapting it to the realities on ground and working from where the market is to where the market needs to be. A lot of people back home haven't seen some things at scale and that we see here easily, and we know that it's going to come. And so for you, you can add that and you can have a vision of what you need to see back home, but you need to adapt it to the reality. Those things aren't skills that you just go to class and you learn. It's just about being open-minded, you know, coming for conferences like this, just understanding what it can take and just believing it that it will happen and going back home to do it.
And one quick thing I'll add to that, sorry, is that just, I think, doubling down on the adaptability. I think that even everything you guys are saying, totally, and I also would just say, too, that, like, we've seen things done, but to the realities of what's on the ground, it's actually this ability to pivot, this ability to saying, I thought I knew the answer, and actually, I'm seeing on the ground this doesn't work. Boom, I'm fast pivoting. I'm stopped blowing money on something that worked maybe in London but isn't working here. As soon as I see the error, and I'm pivoting, and I'm going to try something different. And I think that's one of, honestly, the greatest examples and advantages of working on the continent is this ability and this desire to experiment, and let's get it right. Let's try. So let's try it. If it doesn't work, we learn from it, we move on, and cutting down some of that bureaucracy and some of that, it must be done this way. So I think adaptability is one that you helped highlight.
Thank you so much. There's so much more we could cover we do not have time for. Thank you so much, everyone. Please, huge round of applause for this incredible panel. We can hear it in our earphones. That's how loud it is. Thank you so much, everyone. Those of you who are sitting on a chair, please leave your headsets when you leave on the chair. And there's stuff going on downstairs at 5. Thank you so much, and see you soon.